So with me is Ladislav Timulak. He is a psychotherapist, researcher, and professor at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. He has published many books and articles, and his latest book is Transforming Emotional Pain in Psychotherapy, an Emotion-Focused Approach. So thanks for having us, Ladislav.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Uh, You've been involved for a long time in extensive research, specifically in humanistic psychotherapy. So I would like to ask you if you could give us an overview of the development and the current state of research in humanistic psychotherapy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very broad question. Yes. I'm a counseling psychologist. Yes. So, and my original psychotherapy training was in person-centered therapy. So I was quite familiar with that tradition. And I spent some time collaborating with Robert Elliott. He hosted me in the US as a part of my postdoc. So this is what and I did a study with him on significant events as well. So, I mean, the current status of humanistic psychotherapies research, I think, it's well summarized in some of the papers or chapters recently published. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the paper by Lynn Angus as the first author in psychotherapy research. So I think there is a good summary. So obviously, there was some resurgence in the outcome research, particularly in the area of emotion-focused therapy for couples and for individuals in 90s and early 2000s, and currently as well. Yes, there are several studies currently being run in various countries. So there was a kind of significant decline in 80s, I believe, yes, and perhaps in 70s as well, in the outcome research on humanistic psychotherapies. But I mean, as I'm saying, this is somewhat overcome now, yes. Regarding process research, I mean, there was a huge tradition, and many humanistic therapists, Laura Rice, Les Greenberg, Robert Elliott, yes, they were pioneers of, or belonged among the pioneers of process research, and indeed, there are studies that started in late 70s, led then later on to the development of emotion-focused therapy that built on the basis of person-centered and Gestalt therapy. In 80s, qualitative research, and in 90s as well, started to appear in psychology and in psychotherapy, and again, humanistic kind of therapy researchers such as David Rennie and John MacLeod and Robert Elliott as well, kind of spearheaded qualitative research in psychotherapy. They were among the most influential ones. Bill Stiles as well, who is a person-centered therapist, is not to forget him as well in that regard. I'm sure that I'm missing some people.
It's a long list.
And many qualitative researchers have some allegiance to humanistic therapies, yes, like Clara Hill and other people, although they may have different theoretical orientation. So I think that the paradigm is quite lively. I mean, that paper by Lynn Angus as the first author is a good summary, and obviously a chapter in the handbook edited now by Michael Lambert is Garfield's Handbook of Psychotherapy and Behavior Change, with Robert Elliott as the first author on the chapter, provides a good summary of that research. I think that there is a good international community as well doing, various things. So, yeah, I think it's quite lively, and particularly in process research and qualitative research, I think many humanistic researchers are kind of forerunners. Yes, I mean, I didn't mention 𝗔𝗯ance has a lot of process studies she conducted as well. Yes.
Yeah. I think you mentioned there the outcome and the qualitative. Maybe we can and process actually. So maybe I'd like to split it up and ask you a little bit specifically within the two. From what I do know the paper, and I'll link people up to the Lynn Angus first author paper that you're referring to, and there does seem to be already extensive research and evidence supporting it for problems like clinical depression. There also seems to be some evidence that humanistic therapies studied so far still appear to be less effective in anxiety difficulties than cognitive behavioral ones. What is your take? To what do you attribute these results?
Yeah. So first of all, I know you referred to the kind of the chapter Robert Elliott as the first author, and basically in Linanga's paper it's repeated as well. I mean, this conclusion comes from the meta-analysis that Robert Elliott is doing over the years. Yes, in general, in that meta-analysis, there are no kind of treatments specifically developed as a humanistic treatments for anxiety issues. Yes, so also because of those findings, where often many of those studies use some version of humanistic therapy or a therapy, some sort of supportive therapy resembling, person-centered therapy or so, as a control group. Yes, but there are now much more focused efforts in particularly in the era of emotion-focused therapy to develop kind of genuine treatments specifically built on kind of programmatic research on how to work in an emotion-focused way with particular anxiety disorders. So there is work done by Robert Elliott in Scotland and 𝗵𝗔𝗃𝗅 in Israel on social anxiety. I believe Ben's work was accepted recently, as far as I know. So it will be published very quickly as well. And I'm sure that Robert Elliott is working on publishing results from a study that he runs for several years now, yes, comparing EFT for social anxiety to person-centered therapy for social anxiety. We here in Dublin, we ran a project on developing EFT for 𝗔𝗹𝗲𝗅. So some papers from it already appeared, and some are about to be submitted or just were submitted for review, and we are finalizing our first kind of open trial data. And I just heard good news this week that I got funding for an RCT comparing it to CBT. And so,
congratulations.
So we'll do a study here comparing EFT to CBT for generalized anxiety disorder. And 𝗔𝗹𝗲𝗅 in Canada with Les Greenberg spent the last few years developing emotion-focused therapy for generalized anxiety disorder as well. And as far as I know, they have a book coming out, yes, on 𝗔𝗃𝗃, working with 𝗔𝗃 in emotion-focused way. So this should be out, I guess, quite soon. I mean, our effort here will also hopefully be possible to find in the form of a book, yes, on 𝗔𝗃𝗃. So there are. So I wouldn't agree that it's less effective. So this is the long exposure to, or introduction to what I want to say. I would say that it wasn't genuinely studied. Yes, I mean that there wasn't kind of concentrated effort to develop a therapy.
Yeah.
Because we obviously most of humanistic therapies are developed as what now is fashionable to call it transdiagnostic treatments. Yes, but they are developed not for specific. DSM-defined conditions. So, and I think that there is a belief that it's good to study people with similar presentations. Although, I do not fully believe, yes, in diagnostic categories as they currently stand. I think that our knowledge will progress, and actually, 10 people with what's currently diagnosable as 𝗔𝗃𝗃 perhaps have 3 different type of problems. Yes. So I'm not fully sure whether conceptualizing disorders as we currently conceptualize them. This is based on my clinical experience with the clients we have here.
Yeah.
I mean, we clearly see that they have some things in common, but there are subgroups, yes, of presentations, and some of them they may have more in common with some other disorders currently classified. So. But what I just wanted to say is that it's not bad to have that concentrated experience with a particular presentation or typical cluster of presentations. And I think it informs your clinical knowledge, and then your writing, and then your research, and then your testing. So I think that concentrated effort will lead to the findings that will not contradict what you were just saying, that humanistic therapies would be less effective for anxiety disorders. With the kind of that expertise devoted to tackle anxiety, yes?
And Did you have some promising results from your study on GAD?
I mean, definitely. I mean, it's early on, yes, but I mean, we do not see any reason why therapy, as we conceptualize it, should be less effective, yes, than what's current standard for GAD, yes. And I know it's the same for 𝗵𝗲𝗅𝗍𝗂𝘁 work and Robert Elliott's on social anxiety. That, I mean, they do not do. We do not have yet an RCT directly comparing it to a version of CBT, but benchmark pre-post outcomes, yes. I mean, definitely it appears to be quite promising, yes, the developments that we have. Mm-hmm. Just one thing on anxiety. So perhaps some of the what could be responsible for any kind of what was found in that meta-analysis done by Robert is that, you know, client-centered therapies, you know, anxiety is all about apprehension and expecting danger. And so there isn't sufficient trust to your own internal processes that you'll be able to survive, deal with, experience, process situations that bring those difficult emotions. Yes, so it's all concentrated on apprehension and avoidance. Yes, mm-hmm. So perhaps client-centered therapies that are so respectful, you know, about the pace, you know, could kind of, collude is a very strong word, be overly respectful of avoidance processes, yes, mm-hmm. in clients with anxiety issues. Yeah. While CBT was very kind of direct or active in addressing avoidance, yes, and trying to overcome avoidance and allow people to have experience of self-efficacy, or that they'll, you know, survive the dangers and that they'll be able to get on with their life, because there is a huge cost to avoidance. Yes, avoidance costs us, you know, it limits in social anxiety or social life. In generalized anxiety, it leads to it limits your involvement in everyday activities that you would normally want to be spending time with, and it also leads to, constant apprehension leads to a lot of tiredness and constant anxiety being present. So there's huge costs to avoidance and anxiety. And then I think perhaps some of the results that were reported could be explained by you know, humanistic therapies being overly respectful and perhaps to a certain extent colluding with this avoidance, yes, and thus not encouraging people to have experiences that they actually can get through difficult experiences. The other thing is that, you know, this is in humanistic therapies, not necessarily just humanistic, I'm sure that in psychodynamic therapies as well, that conceptualization of anxiety and depression is seen from EFT perspective as this is like a secondary distress, yes, secondary emotions, yes, in depression, hopelessness, helplessness, low mood, yes, kind of undifferentiated sadness, and in anxiety, this is coupled with this constant apprehension, yes, of it's like a secondary fear. But the underlying feared emotions, this is our experience here, are similar to any other kind of underlying core painful emotions or primary maladaptive emotions, as Les Greenberg calls them. That can be found kind of underlying any kind of psychopathology or any kind of distress, and these are usually, you know, difficulty to be able to stay with experiences of shame that are self-defining, with experiences of being profoundly sad and lonely and disconnected, and experiences of being acutely scared or afraid, acutely. I distinguish it from secondary anxiety that is more apprehensive. Yes, if you read my book, then you perhaps read something of
exactly.
That. Mm-hmm. So you see that these processes, I think, are equally found in anxiety. The only thing is that apprehension is what prevails in the presentation. So while in depression, there come triggers and I collapse and I'm hopeless, helpless. In anxiety, which is often found with depression, there's also very prevalent apprehension of those triggers, difficult situations, you know, rejections.
I believe you referred in your book as anticipatory also.
Yes, exactly. So if I think that there is a little bit an issue with perhaps as traditionally humanistic therapies were practiced, that because people, the cost, if the cost is focused on what's the cost of anxiety, people will want to try to get, over it. Yes, they will want to get and live more fulfilled life. So in social anxiety, it's a good example. It's so painful to get rejection and being shamed. Yes, there's perhaps a history of experiences of being shamed. So to prevent any shaming experience, any rejection at all costs, this is what the life is about. Yes, but that it means that I don't do many things in my life that I would want to be doing. Yes, so somehow highlighting the cost. I think this is what the EFT for anxiety and social anxiety is doing, and going underneath it, what it is, what's being missed because of that avoidance, yes, and that apprehensive anxiety, mobilizes people to find the courage to reconnect, yes, or to live more fulfilling life. So I think we are getting more nuanced understanding, yes, than perhaps was there historical humanistic therapies. But I can't say really, yes. I don't want to be. We really don't know what was responsible for those results, because many of those comparisons there were no genuine, kind of humanistic conditions.
Yeah. It's very interesting to me, this conceptualization you made, that possibly original client-centered therapy could, well, maybe in Les Greenberg's terms, client-centered therapists were too eager to follow but maybe not lead the client.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes sense to me. You've made a lot of connections already with some of the things I wanted to ask you about your own book, which is great. If you don't mind me going just one step back.
Yeah.
Because, you're kind of an authority in qualitative research, and you have done many studies and even meta-analysis in qualitative research.
Extremely flattering.
Well, anyone...
authorities, yes. I learned from a lot of people, yes. I'm a second or third generation of qualitative research.
So that's why you can now do meta-analysis. There's already some to aggregate. Well, anyone interested in the topic of meta-analysis and qualitative research can read your chapter on qualitative and quantitative methods in psychotherapy research. I think it's edited by Wolfgang Lutz and Sarah Knox. I'd still like to ask you, because we still live in the broader psychotherapy paradigm in a mostly outcome research-based world. And so I'd like to ask you to play devil's advocate and to tell us a little bit what unique ways you feel that qualitative research can help us understand psychotherapy, as opposed to just quantitative research.
It's such a complex question, yes.
I'm sorry I'm throwing you with such broad questions.
Yeah, because there's so many genres of qualitative research and so many, kind of things that we study, yes, in psychotherapy. If we stay just with the outcome, yes, like qualitative outcome research as opposed to traditional quantitative outcome research. This is a new area. With my colleague here, we were just commenting on a recent paper published in Journal of Pragmatic Studies that Daniel Fishman edits. Yes, that there was a recent paper from I think it was from Norway, and we commented on, and that paper, this was a case study that found a discrepancy between quantitative and qualitative outcomes. It's like qualitative outcomes were kind of really suggesting that this was a good case, while quantitative outcomes were not suggesting any pre-post change. Yes, so and there was an interesting discussion of it about it with we were commentators and the authors got back to us and so on. But we made some points there. 𝗔𝗯𝗲𝘅𝗍𝗁, my colleague from Ireland, was a co-author of it. And this illustrates where qualitative research can contribute. Yes, so for instance, I did study with one of my master's students a few years back where we compared people who had good pre-post outcomes on core measure and no change on core measure. Yes? And they were qualitatively interviewed about what changed for them since therapy started or as a consequence of therapy. And if you looked only at qualitative accounts, you wouldn't be able to tell whether this is somebody from the group of good outcome or bad outcome, because changes that they reported on or commented on that they noticed in themselves, I mean, they were indistinguishable, more or less, yes, in the two groups. Obviously, we do not ask about the quantity of change, so this is a part of it, yes, as well, that perhaps they were talking about the same thing, but to different extent. It's very difficult to measure, yes, a qualitative account. But still, it somehow pointed at the fact that, I mean, it a little bit questioned the validity of a pre-post outcome changes measured by standard questionnaires. And then we had some other examples, and this is my colleague 𝗔𝗯𝗲𝘅 here suggesting this. He works in a residential care service, and their outcomes, I mean, he works with adolescents who are in residential care or with foster parents, and their outcomes are, that somebody, has less externalized behavior, or that somebody just stays on placement longer, on placement with a family without any, so I mean, it becomes so complex that and idiosyncratic that the outcomes is that matter to them. And his experience was that many of the measures do not capture some nuances. Yes, I mean, in the case study that I'm referring to, the case study was a will to be. I mean, the positive outcome was somebody who was determined to end their life ended up with giving up that determination. Yes. And this was the major outcome. So everybody would agree that this is a major outcome. This was not reflected because, it may be one item in those measures. With 34 items, you have 1 or 2 or 3 items around this area. So I think qualitative research kind of, I mean, it's always, it brings things that may be of interest, and that it can enrich, yes, what you can then test with quantitative research. I mean, I spend a lot of time, significant events research. There are so many interesting things that enrich you so quickly when you just interview. I started to study when clients were interviewed about the therapy session that just ended. Mm-hmm. This is what David Rennie started to do, and I mean, it's just fascinating how many things you realize. For instance, is how important, this was for me early on in my career, how important it is to spend time on socializing people to therapy, is that they really spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the therapist is doing and what are the therapist's intentions, and that the therapist's not full awareness of it, yes, kind of leads therapists to not valuing it sufficiently and leaving the client wondering often, why do I do this, what I'm doing? Yes.
So just to make it clear, through this kind of significant event research, you kind of realize even more the importance of explicitly talking with the client about what's happening in therapy.
Yes, exactly.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
For instance, even now, I mean, I'm just writing some papers, and in general, this is, again, it has qualitative elements, and we interviewed people who finished EFT for generalized anxiety disorder, yes, majority of people spontaneously report as one of the most helpful part of therapy experiential work, chair work, or a depth of work, the fact that I talked to my deceased mother, yes, this was the most helpful thing, and things like this. Then almost equal number finds it also difficult but helpful. But we had one participant that didn't find it, yes, helpful. And the main thing was, I mean, the client was just wondering what it had to do with anything. Like there wasn't this kind of work with between the therapist. Obviously, it's not only the therapist; it's the therapist and the client, both. Why it doesn't come across? Yes, sometimes therapists may try their best, and it may not be understood. But the client, after 16, 20 sessions of therapy, still didn't understand how
what was going on.
Yes, and how it relates to what they want from therapy. Yes, so obviously this is interesting to hear, yes, then when you hear that there are, and it would be many things, yes, like this, yes. Also, I mean, I'm starting to shift in qualitative research, because I think traditional qualitative research in psychotherapy was very theoretical, and I'm moving back to what Bill Stiles kind of worked on, kind of using qualitative research within a declared theoretical framework. Yeah? So in more recent studies that I did, and I find them more interesting, are the ones that you have a particular theory and you want to apply it to, let's say, to a case or several cases, and you want to see, it enriches the nuances of your theoretical thinking. Yes. Again, in my book, this was influenced by Antonio Ascolione's work, a sequential model of emotional transformation. You apply it to cases, and it suddenly, one sheds a light on how you conceptualize the case, but it also enriches the nuances of that sequence, yes, in that particular case. And then you think, is it particular just for this case, or is it more universal? Yeah. And this is 𝗔𝗯𝗲𝘅 assimilation, a theory as well. So I find this type of qualitative research more kind of what interests me currently, is because I think that the problem with the traditional qualitative research, it's funny to call it traditional in psychotherapy, is that it's a little bit silent on a theory. So people come up with categories or themes from what participants, clients in psychotherapy research tell them. But they do not, apart from kind of having a sentence there, we are of emotion-focused orientation or humanistic or psychodynamic, they do not try to kind of explicitly articulate their interpretive framework that they used to make sense and, from clients' hand. Usually traditional qualitative research are silent on it, and it was seen as a virtue. That this is what you should be doing, that you should be bracketing your theoretical assumptions and everything. But then, even if people try to work in two separate groups, like in consensual qualitative research, that they did that experiment that they had two teams analyzing the same data set, and they came up with different conceptualizations with different categories. Yeah. So there obviously is something that shapes your interpretation, is any conceptualization. So I think we should be trying to be much more explicit about it. Yes, what's
what our assumptions are,
Yes. So, and the type of research that the extreme of it is this assimilation, yes, or which we do here as well. We have a particular theoretical framework of emotional transformation, is that there's particular emotional sequence, and this is the framework we are trying to look at every single piece of data. Yeah. From that perspective.
And then
we hold it creatively that if there is an evidence, and 𝗔𝗯𝗲𝘅 writing is excellent on it, is if there is something that we observe that it's not possible to explain with our framework, it challenges our framework. So we are trying to adapt adjust our framework.
Yeah. That is a scientific model in a way, right? You put up hypotheses and then you just work on them out.
Yeah, but it's like two different poles of quality.
Yeah, for sure,
Not trying to do it. Well,
yeah.
Is trying explicitly to do it, and I think that there are nuances between this. Yes, that
for sure.
That every single qualitative research has in itself descriptive elements where you just describe, but also interpretive. It's somehow how do you make sense of it, and sometimes we are a little bit silent on it, and we try to kind of just leave it to clients. But I just think it's just unarticulated and uncommunicated way of how you interpret data, or we try to be very explicit about it.
I did have a feeling, correct me if I'm wrong, that the whole idea of task analysis, the type of qualitative research that Laura Rice, Greenberg developed, was exactly trying to make more explicit the assumptions and basically go in that direction that you're now saying, this type of qualitative research when you really try to work out a theory with the research. Is that true in a way?
It's perhaps, yes. It may be true. I didn't think about it before, so I would have to understand. And I had just experience with task analysis through my students. We did some recently task analysis. We just published a paper that used task analysis. So I'm not that familiar with the nuances of it. But my first thought hearing you is that I would agree. Yes, that this is. It's like post-positivistic variation that combines qualitative and quantitative research in a kind of rigorous effort to try to kind of do something useful with the data, yes, and inform clinical practice as well.
I'd like to go back to your book, Łukasz. So if you could just talk a little bit about transforming emotional pain in psychotherapy. Very briefly, I'd first like to know how you came across, how you first came into contact with emotion-focused therapy.
Yeah. So, because my original training was in person-centered therapy, I also did PhD on significant events, yes, and I spent, so therefore, I finished my master's in 1995. It was in psychology, and started to do my PhD, and as a part, I took part-time training outside of university in person-centered therapy, but my PhD that I did between 95 and 99 was on I called it, I think, important events or something, but it was significant events research. So I was very familiar with the work, written work, yes, of Les Greenberg, Robert Elliott, David Rennie in particular, yes, so they were all from the same kind of paradigm. I spent time in Belgium with 𝗔𝗯𝗍𝗅 as part of my PhD as well. And it's a big person-centered center in Leuven, an experiential center. Yes? So they always collaborated with York, Canada, and so on. So this is what I knew of EFT from writing, yes, and from research, yes, and this was the type of research that I was doing that was within that paradigm. And then as I finished my doctorate, I spent 6 months in Toledo, in Ohio, in US, with Robert Elliott as my host for my postdoc. And I did my first EFT training there with him. And it was interesting, but I'm also very critical. So, I incorporate parts of it to how I was working. I considered myself as an integrative therapist, yes, so I did a lot of CBT training as well, yes, and obviously I liked psychodynamic writing, and so EFT wasn't kind of the main thing that I would be doing, but it was of interest, yes, to me. And then I started to work in Dublin in 2005, and I invited Les Greenberg here to deliver a workshop in 2006, I think it was, and the workshop was good and everything, but then I was really impacted on a experiential emotional level by seeing Les working.
Okay.
Yes, in the small groups, experiential, and this kind of renewed my interest. Yes, and then I went and did training in Canada with him and supervision with Les, and organized a lot of trainings here in Ireland, and we did some training I'm originally from Slovakia and Czech Republic recently as well. So this is what happened. But I think it was particularly a powerful experience of experiencing Les doing therapy. Yes, and seeing him doing therapy, it was just so powerful. And I somehow had that, and I said it to Les many times, that I had that experience that as he writes about therapy, it doesn't capture as he does therapy. I think that as he does therapy, it's much more poignant and moving, and kind of very kind of profoundly human experiences happen. Yes, in emotion-focused therapy, very often. Yes, because it's a therapy that tries to go at the core of what's most painful and difficult in life, yes, for a particular person. And that it's somehow that the writing is very technical or something, is that the writing doesn't convey that poignancy. As I think I mentioned it in one of the papers I cited him, is that I think it was 𝗵cie𝘀𝘁 from Portugal who interviewed Les, yes, and he interviewed him about therapy, and Les is saying there, what attracts him is, seeing pain in people, yes, and
exactly.
It's kind of what he focuses on. So I captured it in a paper. I don't know whether you came across the paper. It's called "Witnessing Clients' Emotional Pain."
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So, and this was what was poignant. But I was saying to Les, this is not captured in the writing. I wasn't trying to capture in the writing in the book.
So when people want to know the experience of EFT, they should look at tapes. That's what you're saying.
As well, and some writing, and I think more writing. It's academically, the writing is very good, yes. But I'm just saying that that level of
experience,
yes, and what makes it distinct, I think, yes. I think that there is something so, I mean, not that it can't happen in other therapies. Obviously, it can happen in any therapy, yes, but it's kind of concentrated effort to bring those poignant experiences.
And how was this transition? Because you have an interesting development then, because you were sort of integrative, and now would you consider yourself now an emotion-focused therapist?
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously professionally I'm a psychologist, so it's complicated. Yes, I mean, I have a colleague and we run programs on online CBTs, you know. So, but I mean, strictly speaking, in my personal practice, yes, I'm an EFT therapist. Yes, yeah. I mean, rarely I can think of that I would diverge and incorporate some other aspects. I mean, I would do it. Yes, I mean, if I have somebody with a choking phobia or something, you know, I may use elements of behavioral therapy. Yes, for symptom in particular. But I mean, my thinking, conceptualization, and the default position is an EFT position. And with most of my clients, I do, you know, very pure EFT work. Yes.
I would like to just shortly go back a little bit to your own book, and you already talked about a lot of elements. We talked about the anticipatory anxiety, the importance of emotional avoidance. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna throw you another broad question in a way, but I think you can handle it. I'd like to ask you a little bit what new ideas or recent developments in EFT did you want to explore in this new book of yours?
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, EFT kind of approach was built on or came out of a process research, yes, work of Laura Rice-Les and Robert Elliott, and many kind of further, yes, after that, a lot of, you know, collaborators that came from York, yes, 𝗔𝗯𝗲𝘅 and Rhonda Goldman, and you know, other people as well, 𝗔𝗹𝗲𝘅, for instance, and so on. And so this was all very interesting, and I think that's why EFT, you know, got credibility in the world of psychotherapy, because there is a lot of research. It's true because it's comparing to CBT world. It's a small group of researchers, but still you have active research group because they have PhD students, a new generation of people, and so on. So I think that there was always that, and people come to SPR conferences. So there was always that lively kind of hub of things happening. Yes. So I think that this was always, part of EFT, and then. I mean, obviously, it's clear in the book that I make it very clear there. What was particularly kind of shifting for me, or something that it kind of brought something particularly of interest, was work of Antonio Pasqualione. And it's his 2000. It's basically based on his dissertation, yes, that was supervised by Les. And his paper with Les from 2007, it's from JCCP, where he kind of captured, reading that paper, it kind of shed a light on EFT that suddenly made sense to me clinically. Yes, and I found it very unique because it had sequential theory, and so I call other theories as a two-step theories. Yes, like you're lacking insight, we provide you with insight. Yes, or you are avoiding exposure. Yes, so it's like two steps things. Yes, you are scared to be exposed. Well, here this was 7 or 8 or 9 steps. And this was so interesting, and I mean, it mapped onto tasks, as originally conceptualized with EFT. But those tasks were originally developed through task analysis, although Antonio's model also through task analysis, but they were developed more phenomenologically. What therapists saw is there is a self-criticism, and you do this, and then there are values in self-criticism, and you stand up to it, and you articulate your need, and so on. But here, the framework was purely emotional. which fitted, what I think is the common principle across all tasks in EFT. Yes, so it suddenly was global distress, undifferentiated emotions, is usually hopeless, helpless, undifferentiated, sad, depressed, down, and so on. Then it led to kind of more differentiation to underlying emotions, like in Antonio's framework or Les's framework. Originally it was shame and fear. Then there was an articulation of the unmet need with it, and then there was a response to the unmet need with compassion, self-soothing, or assertive anger, and then the grieving ensued, and then there was a sense of letting go or empowerment. Yes, and that sequence. There are variations to that sequence. Yes, I simplified it a little bit. Kind of, we started to look at. I started to do a master thesis in 2010, 9 and 10 with students, where we started to apply it to cases, yes, and to think clinically, and suddenly, it felt like a very powerful framework that can guide your clinical strategy with the clients. And the tasks went to the background, yes? They were somehow usable, totally compatible with this framework, because that framework actually followed things, that can be visible in the tasks. But this was kind of unifying principle in it. And the powerful thing is that Antonio's work also was based not only on EFT, but also on client-centered therapy. So there wasn't really a sequence that the therapist would try to follow. And yet, the clients who had good session outcome, they follow the same process. They went from I feel hopeless, helpless, to I just don't feel loved, yes, to I want to be loved, to I feel loved, or I deserve to be loved. It's so sad that I wasn't loved. Yes, and
so
then
the process by itself emerged.
Yes, exactly, just by therapists being empathic there.
Yeah.
So I believe that this is a process of how we process emotions, yes, that are difficult, and that the problems arise at different points of that process, yes, at different stages. And the therapist is doing different things at different stages, yes. So when there is a global distress, you just acknowledge it, but you try to differentiate it and what is actually most painful, yes? You try to overcome avoidance as well, because the things that are most painful are more likely to be avoided, yes? This is the apprehensive anxiety then, yes? When you get to the most painful emotional experiences that are self-defining, yes? Like I'm worthless, I'm flawed, nobody ever loves me, or I feel profoundly on my own, or I'm unprotected, or I feel that I don't have any solid core or something. You try people to stay with it, to elaborate on it, to feel it, to put it to language. This already regulates the emotion. And then you try to articulate what need is not being met, yes, in that experience. So I want to be accepted, I want to be loved, I want to be protected, yes, because this is less writing, is that any kind of painful experience tells us about the unmet needs, yes, what's not being met. Once the need is there, we can try to respond to it, by generating, compassionate experiences. I'm here and I love you. I'm here and I protect you. I'm here and I, value you. And self-affirming experiences. I do deserve to be loved. I want to fight the danger. I want to fight the injustice, or I deserve not to be treated and shamed like this, and things like this. And interestingly, after that, a grief comes. Yes, I'm not particularly a highly emotionally processing person naturally. So I never expect that the grief comes. It doesn't all make sense. It's because the drama is over. Mm-hmm. So people kind of recount what was bad and difficult while not being that consumed by it. Yes, so they can let go now of it, but they still have that sad quality. It was just so fantastic to see that somebody writes about it. Antonio's dissertation is in a journal like JCCP that normally has just numbers and statistics, yes? And then you sit with the client next day and you see it, mm-hmm. yes, without you fully trying to do this.
Yeah.
Yes, and this just comes, yes? So it was so fascinating, and I said with Les that time, I was doing some training in Canada or something, and I was just chatting with Les, and I said, this kind of is so useful. you know, to have that conceptual frame and everything. And it renewed my research interest as well. So I spent a lot of time, and we have a lot of studies. Many were not published yet, but many are close to completion and will be hopefully published in coming days and in coming weeks, months. You know, that's kind of renewed my interest, and then it's ended up in the book.
So
I wanted to share it somehow,
Uh-huh.
and it was very quickly written because you know, I felt urgency to share it somehow, that it may be useful for others as well.
Yeah. So just to try to sum up what you're saying, you feel that the development of EFT and bringing in those ideas of 𝗵cie𝘀𝘁 specifically, in a way, EFT has become even more explicit. Like you're still finding out the steps and the sequences of events that seem to.
I don't think it's more explicit. Yes, I think that it's a trial and error, and what's useful at a given time. Yes, so I mean, you know, I mean, my students, they always learning emotion-focused therapy. We use the book. Yes, that this is the task, this is the tradition. These are the tasks that were developed. Some of them in 70s, some of them in 80s. Yes, some of them later on. So I don't think it necessarily gives. I think it gives a little bit different flavor or different perspective. I think, you know, this is what I was saying to Les often. I was supervised by Les, yes, and we watched so many of his tapes and studied him and everything, that this is how he operates, I was saying to him, yes, because you watch videos, you have those APA DVDs, and you see that he's going from one task to another task. No, and it's because he's following this kind of underlying process.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I think it's also captured in his writing. Yes, but Antonio's work, I mean, it was supervised by Les, but Antonio's work was specifically focused on it. Yes, on the segment of I don't know how many therapy sessions. Yes, and then few cases as well. And now, I mean, a lot of people also outside of EFT paradigm are using his model. You know, he developed the observer-based scales, and they're being used for other therapies. Yes, so he's tapping into process that is good in other therapies as well. Yes, and can be found in other therapies. Obviously, there is a discussion. You know, my kind of use of his work was a little bit. You know, I digressed at times. We tried to write a paper together as well. I don't know whether you saw it. So we had some kind of discussions about it as well.
You mean the case conceptualization?
Yes,
Yeah.
There are some, you know, differences as well. Yes, at times, and you know.
By the way,
it's all exciting in a way. Yes, to discuss those differences. I mean, anytime you know, there is some opportunity, like with Les Greenberg is an example. These are very nice discussions. Yes, about a particular case or cases. Using this type of thinking. Yes, but there are variations. There are, you know, slight disagreements or just kind of various hypotheses, and it's very lively and it's very exciting.
I'd like to ask you also just one last question about TFT, because in your own book, you say in your book that it still had not come out, the new book on case conceptualization by Rhonda Goldman and Greenberg, but now that it has come out, I'd like to ask you your own take on that book, because maybe it contrasts with what you're saying.
Perhaps it does a little bit. I don't know. I mean, it would have to be Rhonda's take on it. Yes, that would definitely differ from mine. I think that Rhonda's and Les's book is as a further explication of traditional case conceptualization in EFT. It incorporates some of this thinking that I'm saying, but it also builds on the whole tradition, you know, of EFT, which is so rich. Yes, I mean, it's really late 70s or mid 70s if you take Laura Rice's work, yes, as well. So and I think all of it is incorporated in the book, in their case conceptualization thinking. Now, when I teach EFT and to my students here, I find this very overwhelming. You know, if they look at that book, yes, because it has so much detail, and because I spent, you know, I spent time with this tradition since, let's say, 94 or something, yes. So I spent 22 years in the tradition, so I'm very familiar with it. So I can easily read it and, you know, and go through it, and it's academically so well done, you know, that it all fits together. You know, you have client vocal quality, you have experiencing scale, you have, I don't know, you know, all of those nuances, you have attachment, you have identity. So everything that was ever kind of conceptualized and studied in EFT is summarized there,
Yeah.
succinctly and academically, superbly.
Yeah.
But I mean, for a student, I mean, it's so much information.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so I teach from the perspective summarizing that in my book, but also in that paper, and I think for anybody who academically wants to engage with EFT, and any clinician, that the 𝗔𝗯𝗲𝗅𝗍𝗂 book is really good and really nuanced, isn't it? I think that the paper with Antonio or the framework offered in my book is much more simplifying. Yes, I mean it's totally compatible with what they are saying, but it's so much simplifying. Yes, it's only 9 or 10 things apart from the depth of their book. Yes,
You mentioned your students a couple of times, and I'd like to finish up our little chat with a question that I've asked all of our colleagues in these interviews, and I'll just jump right into it. I'd like to ask you, what advice would you wish to have received when you were starting out as a psychotherapist?
You should have emailed me this. I can think about it. Yeah.
Do you want me to call it tomorrow?
I don't know. Could you repeat it again?
Yeah, of course.
Some time, yes.
Of course, yeah. I was asking you, what advice would you wish to have received when you were starting out as a psychotherapist?
I mean, I don't have really regrets. Yes, I mean, it was all fascinating for me. So I don't think, I mean, nothing comes to mind like, oh, somebody should have told me. I really don't know. I think, I mean, I'm so grateful, yes, for that career, yes, because obviously, I mean, perhaps like you, yes, I mean, it's fascinating for us, yes, and we enjoy it. I mean, it's not only work, it's a hobby, and I bore students here anytime they ask. We have some introductory classes with them where everybody talks about their hobbies, and it's very difficult for me because this is the hobby that they can work for.
Sure.
So it's very difficult for me. I mean, I really don't have a sense that there was something that was withheld from me that would have, I think there are so many good things, yes, to do, and it's not an advice that I should have gotten, because I think I had very good kind of tutors, yes. Yeah. And one of my first tutors, it's back in Slovakia, in Bratislava, 𝗔𝗯𝗍𝗂𝘁𝗁 is his name. He was a person who kind of was the founder of person-centered therapy in Czechoslovakia at that time, but he was teaching us everything. He had such a broad interest, yes, in so many therapies, and all classes where it was all fascinating, yes, because you can see the depth of various approaches and what they offer, yes, and I think that openness, yes, particularly for students, is to know a lot about various things. I think it's very good. I think, yes.
Well, so thank you so much for the opportunity of this talk.